They left him behind. They made a mistake. Now watch what happens.
They locked the human cadet in a supply closet and fled the dying ship. 6 minutes later, he was the only reason it survived. I am Vorath, Tactical Officer, 3rd Designation, Keshari bloodline of the Vest clan. I have served on this unremarkable ship for 6 standard rotations. I have filed 234 incident reports, survived 4 engagements, and eaten the same compressed ration brick for breakfast every single morning because the food synthesizer on Deck 2 has been pending repair since before I was assigned here. I mention these things not because they are interesting but because they are the full summary of my life up until the moment everything went sideways. My crew, such as they were, consisted of 3 other beings who I tolerated at varying levels. Pizen was a Mervak, tall, gray-skinned with 4 eyes that never blinked at the same time. He was our sniper, and he was excellent at it, mostly because he approached every situation including breakfast like a target acquisition problem. He did not laugh. He did not smile. He once told me that emotional displays were tactically inefficient. I did not argue. Pizen had 14 confirmed long-range kills, and I was not in the habit of arguing with people like that. Tala was a Breathian, small, anxious, and in a permanent state of low-grade panic that somehow never interfered with his ability to keep this ship running. He was our engineer. He spoke very fast, apologized constantly, and had a nervous habit of tightening bolts that did not need tightening. Every bolt on this ship was extremely tight. Say what you want about Tala. The Velthari Ascendant had never once experienced a loose bolt. Queln was our medic, Solvari species, which meant she had 3 sets of eyelids, 0 patience, and a deep philosophical belief that most injuries were the patient's own fault. She trusted no one. Not the crew, not the captain, not the medical equipment she herself had calibrated. She once retested a diagnostic scanner 14 times because she did not trust the first 13 results. The 14th confirmed what the first had said. She did not apologize. And then there was Captain Drelix. Cassari, like me, but older, harder, and significantly more tired. He had been commanding vessels since before I had learned to walk upright. He did not inspire loyalty through speeches or warmth. He inspired it through sheer immovable competence. When Drelix told you the situation was under control, you believed him, not because he was reassuring, but because in 6 rotations he had never once been wrong. We were assigned a joint species patrol near the Veld 9 corridor. Contested territory, low projected threat, standard rotation. The kind of mission that existed mostly to remind various factions that the Allied coalition was watching. Routine, they told us. Straightforward, they told us. And then they told us something else. They told us we were receiving a human cadet. Passon stared at the assignment notice for 11 full seconds, which, for someone who did not display emotions, was basically a complete breakdown. Tala made a sound like a pressure valve failing. Queln read the notice, set it down, and went back to recalibrating something she had already calibrated, which was her version of screaming. I laughed. I should not have laughed, but I did. Cadet Soren Hale arrived on a Tuesday. I did not know what a Tuesday was at the time. I learned later that it was a human time division, one of 7 named segments they used to organize their planetary rotation cycle. They had named each one, individually, as if the days needed personal identities, as if a day would feel left out without a name. This, I would come to understand, was extremely on-brand for humans. He came through the docking corridor at 0600 ship time, carrying 2 bags that were clearly too heavy for him, wearing a uniform that was slightly too large for his frame, and smiling like someone had just told him the best news of his life. He had brown hair, an unremarkable face, and the kind of boundless cheerful energy that made you want to check if something was medically wrong with him. He was 22 years old by human counting. He looked younger. He looked like someone's younger brother who had been accidentally shipped to a war zone. Cadet Soren Hale, he announced to the docking bay, to nobody in particular, with the enthusiasm of someone who had rehearsed this moment, reporting for duty. The docking bay did not respond. The docking bay was a room. I was standing approximately 4 meters away, holding a data slate, and I wanted on the official record that my expression did not change. Kesari, do not wince. We are not a wincing species. What happened to my face in that moment was a purely involuntary muscular event that has no formal name in our language and will not be discussed further. I introduced myself. I showed him to his quarters. His quarters were small, functional, and located directly next to the engine coupling junction, which hummed at a frequency that most species found deeply unpleasant. He looked around the room, nodded twice, and said, "Cozy." I did not respond to that. Dinner that evening was the first true test of everyone's patience. Soren arrived in the common area carrying a sealed container from his personal bag, which he opened with great ceremony to reveal a collection of small, aggressively colorful objects he called snacks. He placed the container in the center of the table like a gift, looked around at all of us with genuine warmth and said, "I brought stuff to share. I wasn't sure what everyone liked, so I just grabbed a mix." Queln looked at the container the way she looked at unverified medical data. Pyson did not look at it at all. Tala picked up one of the small objects, examined it from 6 different angles and then set it back down with the careful precision of someone diffusing an explosive. I, because I am a professional and a representative of the Keshari people, picked one up and ate it. It was aggressively sweet, slightly chemical, and left a coating on my secondary teeth that I could still feel 3 hours later. "Good?" Soren asked, watching me with the eager expression of a creature waiting for approval. "It is," I said, "a flavor." He grinned like I had given him a medal. Then he tried to start a conversation. This was, in retrospect, his greatest tactical error of the evening. He asked Pyson what Mervok homeworlds were like. Pyson told him in a flat, detailed, and thoroughly joyless 14-second summary, then returned to his food. Soren nodded vigorously, said that's actually really cool, and then immediately followed it with a question about Mervok mating customs. The silence that followed was so heavy it had gravitational properties. Tala made the pressure valve noise again. Queln stood up and left. Pyson's 4 eyes, for the first time in my 6 rotations of knowing him, blinked. All 4. Simultaneously. Soren, to his credit, seemed to realize something had gone wrong, because he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, but a real one, sudden and loud and uncontrolled before he had even finished the sentence. He laughed at his own terrible question before he could complete it, and something about the sheer ridiculousness of the situation made the laugh go on longer than it should have. It was the single most chaotic thing I had ever witnessed at a dinner table. Captain Drelix entered the common area at that moment, looked at Soren, looked at Pyson's expression, looked at me, and then poured himself a cup of his beverage, turned around and walked back out without a single word. That was the most communication Drelix offered Soren for the first 3 days. Soren did not seem to notice, or if he noticed, he did not allow it to slow him down. He asked questions constantly, about the ship, about the mission parameters, about the star charts, about why the food synthesizer on Deck 2 was still broken, which was actually a good question that none of us had a satisfying answer to. He followed Tola through the maintenance corridors, handing him tools and asking about every single component until Tola, who was constitutionally incapable of being rude to anyone, began answering in full technical paragraphs just to fill the silence before Soren could ask something worse. He shadowed me during a tactical review and pointed at a section of the star chart and asked, "What happens if we go that way instead?" "We do not go that way," I said. "But what if we did?" "We do not. Hypothetically, though. Cadet Hale." "Yeah? We do not go that way." He accepted this. He wrote something in a small notebook he carried. An actual notebook with an actual pen, made of actual compressed organic material, on a ship with 17 functioning data input terminals. I did not ask about the notebook. I was not ready for that answer. Day 9 of the patrol was quiet. Suspiciously quiet, in the way that experienced officers recognized and nervous engineers tightened bolts over. Toller had retightened every accessible bolt on decks 1 through 4 by 0800. I noticed this. I did not say anything, because Toller's anxiety had historically been a more reliable early warning system than our actual sensors, and our actual sensors were showing nothing, which, as it turned out, was the problem. The Skorathi did not appear on our sensors because they had positioned themselves inside the ion shadow of the 3rd debris belt running parallel to the Veld 9 corridor. It was a smart move, patient, calculated and executed with a precision that I would have respected enormously under different circumstances. Specifically, circumstances where they were not using it to ambush us. The first shot hit the Velthari Ascendant on the port stabilizer array at 11:47 ship time. I know the exact time because I was looking at the clock when it happened, not for any tactical reason. The food synthesizer on Deck 2 had allegedly been repaired that morning, and I was calculating whether I had enough time before the next scan cycle to go check. This is the kind of thought a person has in the last moment before everything becomes terrible. I have made peace with it. The ship lurched. Hard. The kind of lurch that threw Tola completely out of his maintenance alcove and sent him sliding across the floor of the engineering bay with a shriek that I heard from 2 decks up. Every alarm on the Velthari Ascendant activated at once, which created a sound that was less like a warning system and more like the ship itself was personally offended. "Contact," I said, which was the least useful thing I had ever said in my career, given that the contact had already made itself extremely known. They came in fast. 3 Skorathi interceptors, compact and brutal, built for exactly this kind of corridor ambush. They did not hail us. They did not issue demands. The Skorathi were not a species that wasted time on conversation when they had already decided how things were going to end. The second shot took out our port maneuvering thrusters. The third hit the primary communications array. The fourth, and I want to be very clear about how quickly this happened because it was less than 40 seconds from the first impact, the fourth shot hit the bridge. Captain Drelix went down. Not dramatically. Not slowly. He was standing at the command console issuing orders in that flat, steady voice that had guided us through 4 previous engagements, and then the bridge panel directly to his left detonated from a power surge, and he was simply on the floor, conscious for approximately 6 seconds after impact, long enough to look at me and say, with the calm of a man who had already mentally filed the paperwork, "Hold the ship, Vorath," and then he was not conscious anymore. The bridge smelled like burning conduits and something sharper underneath it. I was already moving to the tactical console when I registered, peripherally, that Soren Hale was also on the bridge. He had come up from the lower deck during the first alarm, which was either very brave or very stupid, and at the time I had categorized it firmly in the second column. He had been standing near the rear station, and I had fully expected him to be pressed against the wall, wide-eyed, doing nothing useful, which would have been completely understandable for a cadet 22 years old on his first live engagement. He was not doing that. He was at the secondary navigation console, fingers already moving across the surface, and he was not panicking. His face had changed. I noticed it even in the chaos of a ship taking fire and a captain bleeding on the floor. The loose, open, endlessly cheerful expression he had worn for 9 straight days was simply gone. What replaced it was not fear. It was not bravado either. It was something quieter than both of those things, focused in a way that had no performance in it, no audience, no awareness of anyone watching. He pulled up the sensor grid and rerouted the damaged array through the secondary buffer before I had given the order to do it. 3 interceptors, he said, not to me specifically, just to the room, to whoever needed the information. Positioned at bearing 27 Mark IV. They're using the debris belt as cover, which means they can't move laterally without exposing their engine sections. He said it, the way Pisson talked about targets. Flat, precise, certain. I looked at him for exactly 1 second. Which was 1 second longer than I could afford in the middle of an active engagement. He did not look back. He was already pulling power readings from the damaged port section, cross-referencing with the structural integrity data, running calculations I had not asked for. "Vorath," he said, and his voice was steady, completely steady, in a way that I had not heard from him in 9 days of constant cheerful noise. "We have maybe 4 minutes before they come around for a second pass. What do you need?" I had served under Captain Drelix for 6 rotations. I had worked alongside Pesson, who had 14 confirmed kills and spoke about emotions like they were a design flaw. I had never in my professional career been surprised by a crew member in the middle of a combat situation. I was surprised. I told him what I needed. He did it. I want to be precise about the timeline, because precision matters when you are describing the worst thing you have ever witnessed. The second Skorathi pass came at 12:04 ship time. 17 minutes after the first. It hit the Velthari Ascendant on the starboard hull, mid-section, and the resulting structural failure sent a feedback surge through the tactical console I was standing at. The surge threw me backward into the rear bulkhead with enough force to crack 2 of my secondary rib plates and do something deeply unpleasant to my left shoulder joint. I slid down the wall and landed on the floor of the bridge in a way that was not dignified and will not be described in further detail. I was conscious barely. The kind of conscious where the world has developed a persistent tilt and sounds arrive slightly after they should, like the universe has developed a minor lag in its processing. Soren shouted something. I could not parse it fully. I heard my name in it, and then there were footsteps, multiple sets, coming from the lower deck, and for approximately 4 seconds I thought, with what remained of my functional optimism, that this was rescue, that the crew had come up, that Pyson and Tola and Queln had heard the second impact and come to help. I want to document for the official record that I genuinely believed that I was wrong. Pyson entered first. He assessed the bridge in the way he assessed everything, quickly, thoroughly, and without any visible emotional engagement. His 4 eyes moved across Drelix on the floor, across me against the bulkhead, across Soren at the navigation console, across the damage reports scrolling on every active screen. He did all of this in about 3 seconds. Then he turned to Tola and Queln, who had come in behind him, and said, "The ship cannot fight. The captain is down. The tactical officer is incapacitated. Our options are two. We attempt to continue engagement with a damaged vessel, an unconscious commander, and no realistic probability of success, or we take Escape Pod 3, broadcast a surrender signal on the Skorathi open frequency, and negotiate terms." He said it the way he said everything. Flat. Logical. Completely without hesitation. The silence that followed lasted about 2 seconds. Tola was making a sound I had never heard from him before. Not the pressure valve anxiety sound. Something smaller and worse than that. He had his hands pressed against the sides of his head, which for Breathians was a physical response to extreme distress, and he was looking at the floor, not at any of us, and he said, "We cannot win this, we cannot win this. The hull integrity on Section 4 is gone. The maneuvering thrusters are gone, communications are gone, we cannot win this." Queln said nothing for a moment. She was looking at Captain Drelix. Her 3 sets of eyelids cycled slowly, which in Solvari body language indicated processing, the kind of deep internal calculation that precedes a decision already made. Then she said, quietly, "The survival probability for remaining on this vessel is below 12%. She had run the numbers, of course she had. Queln always ran the numbers. "You are talking about surrender," Soren said. His voice was still steady, still that new voice, the one I had not known existed 9 days ago. He had turned from the navigation console and he was looking at all 3 of them, and his expression was not angry yet. It was the expression of someone checking that they had understood correctly before responding, like he was giving them the chance to say he had misheard. "We are talking about survival," Pyson said. "The captain is still alive," Soren said. "The captain is unconscious. He is alive. He needs medical attention, not an escape pod pointed at the enemy." Pyson looked at Soren for a long moment. Long by Pyson's standards, which meant approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, with the specific kind of flatness that is not indifference but is something colder than indifference, "You are a cadet. On your first patrol, you do not have the rank, the experience, or the authority to make this determination." "Neither do you," Soren said. "The captain is still breathing." What happened next took less than 90 seconds. I want to say that because 90 seconds sounds like enough time for someone to intervene. It sounds like enough time for something to change. It was not. 90 seconds is a very long time when 3 people have already made a decision, and it is almost no time at all when you are watching them execute it. Pyson crossed to Soren in 4 steps and with the calm efficiency of someone performing a tactical objective, not a betrayal, grabbed him by the arm and moved him toward the corridor access hatch. Soren resisted. He was not a small person by human standards, but Pyson was a Mervok, and Mervok upper body strength exceeded Kessari by roughly 30%, which exceeded human by more. Soren got one hand onto the doorframe and held it for a moment, actually held it, long enough that I registered genuine surprise even through the fog of my injuries. Then Tola, who I want to remind you was small and anxious and had spent 9 days apologizing for things that were not his fault, pushed from behind. They got Soren into the emergency supply compartment on the corridor junction just outside the bridge. The lock engaged. It was a manual lock, reinforced, designed to seal compartments during hull breaches. Soren hit the door once from the inside. Then I heard his voice muffled through the reinforced panel, not shouting, just talking, fast and precise, telling them that they were making a mistake, that the Skorathi did not historically honor surrender negotiations from Allied coalition vessels, that the survival math was wrong, that Drelix was alive, that they needed to think about what they were actually doing. Nobody responded. Queln had already gone back for the medical kit, not to treat Drelix, but to take it with her. Tala was pulling emergency power cells from the bridge storage, the portable ones, the kind with trade value. Pyson was already walking toward Escape Pod 3. I watched all of this from the floor. I could not stand, my left side was not cooperating, and the persistent tilt the world had developed had worsened to something closer to a spin. I opened my mouth to speak and what came out was not words. I tried again. "Pyson," I said. He stopped. He turned and looked at me against the bulkhead. His 4 eyes processed me with the same flat efficiency they processed everything, and something moved across his expression that I could not name and did not want to. "You are critically injured," he said. "You cannot walk. You cannot fight. The probability of your survival on this vessel is below 8%. He said it like information. like he was doing me a courtesy by being accurate. "Tyson," I said again, and I did not have a follow-up. I did not have an argument ready, or a plan, or the physical capacity to do anything except say his name a second time and hope that it landed somewhere that mattered. It did not land anywhere. He turned back toward the corridor. Toller did not look at me at all as he passed. Queln paused at the bridge door for exactly 1 second, and her 3 sets of eyelids cycled again, and I thought for that 1 second that she was going to say something. She did not say anything. The door closed. I listened to their footsteps go down the corridor. I listened to the sounds of the ship dying slowly around me. I listened to Soren Hale, locked in an emergency supply compartment 8 meters away, go quiet. Then I listened to nothing. Captain Drelix breathed on the floor beside me, slow and shallow and stubborn, the way he did everything. I looked at the ceiling of the bridge and I thought, with great clarity, that I had served on this unremarkable ship for 6 standard rotations, had filed 234 incident reports, and that none of them had prepared me for the particular feeling of watching the people I had stood beside choose with full information and total calm to leave. It was not like anger. It was quieter than anger, heavier. I closed my eyes. I did not intend to. I came back to consciousness because something was pulling my arm, not gently, not with any particular concern for my cracked rib plates or my damaged shoulder joint, with the focused, efficient grip of someone who had decided something was going to happen and was now making it happen regardless of what the universe thought about it. I opened my eyes. Soren Hale was crouched over me, pulling my arm across his shoulders, already halfway through the process of lifting a Keshari tactical officer off the floor of a damaged bridge. He was breathing hard. There was a cut above his left eye that was producing a quantity of blood that would have concerned Queln professionally and personally, and his uniform had a long tear across the left sleeve that had not been there before. I looked at the emergency supply compartment door 8 meters away, which was now open. The reinforced manual lock, I should note, had been defeated. Not with any tool I could identify from the debris scattered around the doorframe, with what appeared to be, and I cannot stress enough how much I did not want this to be true, a piece of the door's own internal hinge mechanism that Soren had apparently worked loose from the inside and used as a lever against the locking pin. He had been in there for approximately 6 minutes. "You are awake," he said, not as a question, just as a data point he was now incorporating. "Good. Can you put weight on your left side?" "No," I said. "Okay, right side only then. I've got you." He did in fact have me, which was a sentence I would not have predicted needing to use at any point in my career. He got me to the emergency medical alcove off the main corridor in a process that was undignified for both of us, and took 4 minutes and involved a great deal of wall bracing and one moment where I was genuinely uncertain if we were both going to end up on the floor. We did not end up on the floor. Soren planted his feet and held, and we did not end up on the floor. He sat me against the alcove wall, checked that I was stable, and then went back for Drelix. He brought the captain back in the same way, slower, more careful, because Drelix was fully unconscious and Soren was working alone in the corridor between the bridge and the alcove had developed a new and inconvenient list to the left from structural damage. He got Drelix onto the emergency medical platform, activated the automated stabilization system, checked the readouts twice, and then stood up and looked at the state of the ship around him. He was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he picked up the portable power cell Tola had dropped in the corridor, because Tola had apparently fumbled one in his hurry to leave, and Soren turned it over in his hands and said to nobody, "Okay, just okay." And then he went to work. What followed was the single most alarming display of applied engineering I have ever witnessed, and I once watched Tola rebuild a plasma coupler with a bent tool and a length of thermal wire during an active pressure leak. What Soren did made that look conservative and well-planned. He went through the ship the way a person goes through a house they grew up in, not hesitantly, not with any need to check what was where, because he had spent 9 days following Tola through every maintenance corridor and asking questions about every component, and apparently he had been paying attention in a way that none of us had given him credit for. He pulled 3 more portable power cells from emergency storage on Deck 3. He rerouted the remaining thruster power through the secondary coupling junction on Deck 2, the one next to his quarters, the one he had listened to hum at unpleasant frequencies every night for 9 days, and had apparently also been thinking about. He bypassed the damaged primary communications array entirely, and rebuilt a directional signal through the sensor grid which was not what the sensor grid was designed for, and which Tola would have called inadvisable, and which worked. He used actual tape at one point. I want to be specific, physical adhesive tape. Silver gray, fibrous, pressure-sensitive. A human material I had no name for until later, when Soren told me it was called duct tape and that humans used it for basically everything. He produced a roll of it from his personal bag, which had apparently traveled with him through an ambush, a betrayal, and 6 minutes of manual lockpicking, and he used it to secure a rerouted conduit coupling that would not stay seated in its housing. He pressed it down, tested the connection, and moved on. I watched all of this from the alcove entrance where I had dragged myself to a standing position against the wall, because lying down while someone else fought for my ship was not something I was capable of sustaining regardless of my rib plates. I watched him work. I watched him pull up the tactical display on the portable data unit he had grabbed from the bridge, prop it against a conduit housing on the corridor wall, and begin running numbers. The numbers were not good. I could see that from where I was standing. He could see that too. It did not slow him down. "The interceptors are going to come around again," he said, talking to me now, including me in this without asking if I wanted to be included, which I appreciated more than I was prepared to admit. "Third pass. They'll be expecting either a dead ship or a surrender signal. We have one functional thruster cluster, partial sensor capability, and about 40% power to the weapons array, which is actually more than I expected." "It is more than I expected also," I said. "The debris belt," he said, pointing at the tactical display. "They used it as cover to hit us. It runs parallel to the corridor, about 600 meters off our starboard side. If I can get us moving even partially, even badly, I can use the same belt against them, push our profile into the debris field. Their targeting systems will have trouble distinguishing our hull signature from the debris mass." I looked at the tactical display. I looked at the power readings. I looked at Soren Hale, 22 years old, bleeding from above his left eye, holding a roll of duct tape. "Cadet," I said slowly, "the debris field itself presents a significant collision risk to a vessel with compromised maneuvering capability." "Yeah," he said, "it does. You are proposing to navigate damaged ship into a debris field, using partial thruster capability and a sensor array that is currently also functioning as a communications antenna. Basically, yeah. The math on this," I said, "is not good." "The math on this," he agreed cheerfully, and I want to note that the cheerful was back. Some version of it, sitting right alongside the focus instead of replacing it, is genuinely terrible, but the math on doing nothing is worse. He looked at me and his expression was open and certain and completely unintimidated by the situation in a way that I found both deeply irrational and against every professional instinct I possessed, convincing. "I need someone on the power management console," he said. "Can you walk?" My left side was cracked. My shoulder joint was damaged. The world still had a slight tilt to it. "Yes," I said. I could not, strictly speaking, walk. I could move with significant assistance from the corridor wall in a forward direction at a reduced pace. Soren accepted this without comment, and positioned himself on my left side, which was the damaged side, and let me use his shoulder as a secondary support without making any sort of remark about it. We got back to the bridge. He flew the ship into the debris field. I managed power distribution from the secondary console, redistributing what we had to wherever Soren needed it, which changed approximately every 40 seconds because the situation kept changing, and Soren kept adapting to it in ways that I could not fully predict even as they were happening. The Skorathi interceptors came around for their third pass and found a ship that was not dead and not surrendering, and was doing something with the debris field that their targeting systems apparently could not immediately categorize. I will tell you what happened next in the following section. But I want to pause here first and say something that I did not say at the time because I did not have the words for it at the time and because Kesari are not a species that pauses in the middle of active combat situations to acknowledge things. He stayed. That is the whole of it, reduced to its simplest form. Everyone with more experience, more authority, and more tactical training had done the math and left. Soren Hale had done the same math, reached the same conclusions about the odds, and stayed anyway. Not because the math changed. Not because the odds improved, because Drelix was breathing on a medical platform and I was damaged against a wall and the ship was still technically a ship. He stayed. And then he got to work. Here is what Soren intended to do. He intended to push the Velthari Ascendant into the debris field far enough that the Skorathi targeting systems would lose clean acquisition on our hull. He intended to use that window to broadcast the rebuilt directional signal on the Allied emergency frequency. Draw enough attention to our position to make the Skorathi interceptors reconsider the engagement, and buy enough time for Drelix to stabilize and for someone somewhere to notice we had not completed our patrol check-in. That was the plan. It was a reasonable plan, modest even, survival-focused. The kind of plan that asked for just enough luck to function and did not demand anything dramatic from the universe. The universe apparently was feeling generous that day. What actually happened was this. Soren pushed us into the debris field at 12:31 ship time, running on partial thrusters and what I can only describe as aggressive optimism. The Skorathi interceptors adjusted their approach vector to compensate, which was the correct tactical response, and the lead interceptor moved to a flanking position to get a cleaner angle on us through the debris. What the lead interceptor did not know, and what Soren did not know either, and what I did not know because our sensors were currently pretending to be a communications antenna, was that there was a Skorathi command vessel holding position behind the far edge of the debris belt. Command vessels do not typically participate in corridor ambushes. They direct them from a distance. They sit at a safe remove and issue instructions and monitor outcomes, and do not, under normal tactical doctrine, position themselves anywhere near the engagement zone. This one had moved closer, possibly to observe, possibly because the commander was impatient, possibly for reasons that the surviving Skorathi crew never fully explained, or if they did, the translation was lost somewhere in the post-engagement filing process. It does not matter why it was there. What matters is that it was there, holding position just beyond the debris belt edge, running minimal power signatures to avoid detection, and when Soren fired the weapons array at 40% capacity into the debris field, not at any specific target, but as a dispersal attempt to create additional sensor interference, the energy discharge hit 3 large debris fragments in sequence, accelerated them on a trajectory that no reasonable tactical model would have predicted, and sent them directly into the command vessel's unshielded portside section at a combined velocity that the command vessel was not designed to survive. The explosion was significant. I know this because even through the debris field and our compromised sensors and the general chaos of the situation, the Velthari Ascendant registered a shockwave that knocked Soren sideways from the navigation console and caused me to grip my secondary console with both hands, including the damaged shoulder, which I will remember for some time. The 3 Skorathi interceptors stopped their attack run. In my experience, interceptors do not stop attack runs unless they have received new orders, or unless the source of their orders has just been eliminated by an improbable sequence of debris ricochets caused by a 22-year-old human cadet firing blindly into an asteroid field. They held position for 47 seconds. Then they retreated. Not a tactical repositioning, not a flanking adjustment, a full withdrawal back along their approach vector, away from the Veld 9 corridor, away from us. I stared at the sensor readings for a long moment. The directional signal Soren had rebuilt through the sensor grid had been broadcasting continuously through all of this, sending our position on the Allied emergency frequency to anyone within reception range. At 12:39 ship time, 8 minutes after the Skorathi withdrawal, the signal got an answer. Then it got 12 answers. Allied coalition vessels, a response unit that had been staging 3 systems over for a completely unrelated supply operation, had picked up our beacon. They were already moving. They arrived at the edge of the Veld 9 corridor at 13:18 ship time, 47 minutes after the command vessel went down, and when their lead ship hailed us, the voice on the other end had the specific tone of someone who had expected to find debris and had found instead a damaged but structurally intact vessel sitting in the middle of a debris field with its sensors pointed sideways. Velthari Ascendant, the hail said. Please confirm your status. I looked at the sensor display, which confirmed 12 Allied vessels on approach. I looked at the medical alcove readout, which confirmed Drelix was stable. I looked at the structural integrity reading, which confirmed the ship was damaged but not dying. Then I looked at Soren Hale. He was sitting on the floor of the bridge, not at a console, not reviewing tactical data, not assessing the situation or preparing a report or doing any of the things that the moment seemed to demand. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the base of the navigation console, and he had produced from somewhere on his person a ration pack which he had opened and was eating with the calm, unhurried focus of someone whose most pressing current concern was the food in his hand. He had a cut above his eye that had dried. His uniform was torn. His hair was doing something complicated from the shock wave. He was chewing thoughtfully and looking at the middle distance, and he had the expression of someone sitting quietly after a long day, not someone who had, in the past hour and a half, broken out of a locked compartment, dragged 2 injured crew members to safety, flown a crippled ship into a debris field, accidentally destroyed an enemy command vessel, triggered a fleet withdrawal, and sent a beacon that had just drawn 12 Allied ships to a position that was going to significantly alter the strategic balance of the Veld 9 corridor. He did not know that last part yet. He did not know about the command vessel or what its destruction meant for Skorathi fleet coordination in this sector, or that the Allied response unit's commanding admiral was already drafting a preliminary action report that would eventually reach the Coalition Council and change 3 active patrol protocols within the month. He did not know any of it. He was eating a ration pack. Velthari Ascendant, the hail repeated. Please confirm status. I pressed the communications toggle. This is Tactical Officer Vorath, I said, and my voice came out steady, which I considered a personal achievement given everything. Velthari Ascendant is damaged but operational. Captain Drelix is stable. We have 2 crew requiring medical attention. The Skorathi contact force has withdrawn. The corridor is clear. A pause from the other end. Confirmed, Ascendant. Can you tell us what happened out there? I looked at Soren again. He had glanced up when he heard his own name not mentioned, which I had not mentioned, and he met my eyes for a moment, and his expression was just present. Calm, unremarkable. The expression of someone who had done what needed doing and was now eating a ration pack and did not appear to require acknowledgement for the connection between those 2 things. I turned back to the communications toggle. I will file a full report, I said. It will require some time to write accurately. This was true. I was not sure at that moment that I had the words for it yet. I kept looking at him anyway. Pessin, Tala and Queln were found at 1847 ship time on the same day. The Skorathi, as Soren had correctly predicted in a locked compartment while nobody was listening, did not honor surrender negotiations from Allied coalition vessels. What they did instead was take the escape pod's occupants into temporary holding, determine that 3 mid-rank crew members from a patrol vessel had no meaningful intelligence value, and release them into open space on emergency rations with a functional beacon, which was either an act of contempt or an act of efficiency, depending on which Skorathi cultural scholar you consulted. The Allied response unit picked them up 4 hours after arriving at Veld 9. The formal hearing convened 12 days later. I gave testimony for 3 hours. I gave it accurately, completely, and in the flat, precise language that Kesari legal proceedings required. I described the ambush, the damage, the captain's injury, and then I described in sequential order and without editorial comment every decision Pyson and Tola and Queln had made from the moment they walked onto that bridge. I described the lock engaging on the supply compartment. I described Tola not looking at me as he passed. I described Queln's pause at the door and her silence, and the sound of 3 sets of footsteps going away down the corridor. The panel was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then they asked if I had anything to add. I said no. I had more to add. I chose not to add it, because what I had more to say was not legal testimony. It was something older and less formal than that, and it belonged to me. Pyson received the harshest formal sanction available under coalition military law. Tola and Queln received lesser designations accounting for various factors that the legal panel spent considerable time deliberating over, factors that I did not contest, because contesting them was not my function in that room. Captain Drelix recovered. He was on his feet in 9 days, which his medical team described as ahead of projected timeline and which Drelix himself described as expected. His first official action upon returning to active status was to submit a formal commendation for Cadet Soren Hale, which he wrote himself in full by hand in the old Kesari script that senior officers used for documents they considered important. It was 4 sentences long. I read it once. I will not reproduce it here. Some things are not mine to share. What I will say is that it was the most Drelix had said about anything in the 6 rotations I had served under him, and that the 4 sentences landed with the weight of considerably more words, which was exactly how Drelix operated, and why we had always believed him when he said a situation was under control. The Allied Council convened a separate session to debate the tactical engagement at Veld 9. This session lasted 2 days. It involved 7 species representatives, 4 military analysts, 2 strategic modeling teams, and 1 very long argument about what exactly should be entered into the official record regarding the debris field maneuver and its outcome. They asked me to explain what Soren had done in terms that each species delegation could understand within their own tactical frameworks. I tried. I told the Mervac delegation that Soren had identified a resource differential and exploited it through unconventional application. They accepted this, filed it under irregular warfare methodology, and moved on. I told the Breathian delegation that Soren had performed a stability assessment, determined conventional options were insufficient, and implemented an adaptive engineering solution under duress. They asked several detailed questions about the power rerouting. I answered them. They seemed satisfied. I told the Solvari delegation that Soren had run the survival probability calculations, found them unacceptable, and chosen to alter the variables rather than accept the outcome. The lead Solvari representative looked at me for a moment and then said, carefully, "He changed the math?" And I said, "He decided the math was negotiable." The Solvari representative wrote something down and did not ask further questions, which from a Solvari meant either deep understanding or deep confusion, and I was not certain which. Then the council chair asked me to summarize, for the record, what category of soldier Cadet Soren Hale represented, so that the coalition could update its joint species integration protocols accordingly. I sat with this question for longer than was probably appropriate for a formal session. The honest answer was that I did not have a category. Every framework I had for understanding soldiers, crew members, tactical decisions, survival responses, none of it produced a clean result when I applied it to what Soren had done. He had not followed protocol, because protocol did not cover his situation. He had not acted on training because no training program produced that specific sequence of decisions. He had not been driven by odds, because the odds had been comprehensively against him and he had been aware of this and had proceeded anyway. I cannot categorize him, I told the council. The chamber was quiet. Then how do we file this? The chair asked. I do not know, I said. File it as human. I suspect that will have to be sufficient. The official report on the Veld 9 engagement ran to 47 pages. The section covering Soren's actions was 9 pages long and contained in the final paragraph the following notation from the lead analyst, which I am including here because it is the most accurate thing anyone official said about any of it. The notation read, Cadet Hale's decision-making process during this engagement does not conform to any existing Allied tactical model. Further study is recommended. Classification pending. Classification pending. The galaxy looked at what one human had done on a dying ship in a debris field and said, essentially, we will get back to you on this. I found that very funny. I also found it in a way I could not fully articulate exactly right. I have been asked on 3 separate occasions since the Veld 9 engagement to speak to junior Kasari officers about what I learned from serving alongside a human. I declined all 3 times. Not because I had nothing to say, because what I had to say was not the kind of thing that translated well into a formal address to junior officers without making me sound like I had sustained more head damage than the medical reports indicated. So I am saying it here instead, in this account, which is technically a mission debrief document and therefore subject to no particular standard of dignity. Here is what the Keshari believed about humans before I met one. We believed they were soft. Physically they are, compared to most species in the coalition. No secondary skeletal reinforcement, no redundant organ systems, no protective dermal layering worth mentioning. A Keshari child has more baseline physical resilience than an adult human by most measurable standards. We knew this and we filed it, and we drew conclusions from it that we were very confident about. We believed they were loud, emotionally excessive, prone to expressing internal states in external and unnecessary ways, through volume, through facial movement, through laughter at inappropriate moments, through bringing containers of colorful snacks onto warships and offering them to species who had not asked. We believed their optimism was a deficiency, a failure of accurate threat assessment, the kind of cognitive gap that evolution had simply not yet corrected in a species that had not been fighting long enough to know better. I was wrong. I want to be clear that admitting this is not something I am doing gracefully. I am doing it the way I do everything, which is with significant internal resistance, a lengthy delay, and the private hope that nobody I respect is paying close attention. I was wrong about the softness. Soft things can hold on. I watched Soren hold a doorframe against a Mervok, and I watched him hold a dying ship together with rerouted power cells and physical adhesive tape, and I watched him hold his own nerve in a situation where 3 more experienced crew members had done the math and decided the situation was not holdable. I was wrong about the noise. The noise was not excess. The questions were not pointless. The cheerfulness was not a gap in threat assessment. It was something I do not have a clean word for in my language, something that exists in the space between knowing how bad things are and deciding to show up anyway. The Keshari have a concept for duty. We have a concept for resolve. We do not have a single word for the thing where you know the odds and laugh anyway, not because you are foolish but because the alternative is to stop, and stopping is the one option you have already decided is not available. Soren Hale had that thing in abundance. I am not going to give it a name. It does not need one from me. What I will say is this. I filed 234 incident reports before Veld 9. I have filed 11 since. The 11 since are different from the 234 before, in ways that are difficult to measure and that I have not attempted to explain to anyone official. I notice things differently now. I notice when the math says stop and someone decides the math is negotiable. I notice what it costs and what it produces. I notice that the two are not always proportional, and that the gap between cost and outcome is where most things that matter actually happen. I learned this from a 22-year-old human cadet on his first patrol, who broke out of a locked compartment and dragged me off a floor and flew a damaged ship into an asteroid field and then sat down and ate a ration pack like it was a Tuesday. It was, in fact, a Tuesday. I know that now. I am sitting at my station on the Velthari Ascendant as I write this. The food synthesizer on Deck 2 has been repaired, finally, after 7 standard rotations of pending status, which should feel like a resolution but mostly feels suspicious. Drelix is in the command chair doing paperwork with the focused displeasure of a man who has survived worse than paperwork and will survive this too. The ship is quiet. Soren is 3 meters to my left. He has just produced from somewhere on his person, because he always has something somewhere on his person, a small container of those aggressively colorful snacks he brought on day 1. He has set it on the console beside him. He has pushed it slightly in my direction, without looking at me, without saying anything, without making any kind of event out of it. I look at the container. I look at the tactical display. I pick up one of the small colorful objects and eat it. It is still aggressively sweet. It still leaves a coating on my secondary teeth. It is by every measurable standard unnecessary. I do not explain why I took it. I do not need to.
Maybe the most important part of this story wasn't the battle. It was the moment some left and one human stayed. Sometimes in life, the math says it's dangerous to stay, but responsibility, character, or something deeper decides otherwise. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Sci-Fi Tales, press the bell icon, and leave a comment telling me what would you have done in that situation.